What do you think is the great success of Gunsmoke?
Cast that's ever been together. Everyone is only interested in making a great show regardless of how much they have to do in the thing. They only want it to look real. We try to make it a semi-documentary.
Before his passing, Ken Curtis, the man forever remembered as Festus Hagen from Gunsmoke, left behind a confession that stunned everyone who loved the show. For years, Gunsmoke was one of television's most beloved westerns, and its behind-the-scenes world seemed just as charming as the stories it told. But as it turns out, not everything on set was as peaceful as Dodge City appeared on screen. Ken Curtis, known for his scruffy beard, twangy voice, and good-natured humor, had carried a secret for decades, something that happened during the peak of the show that changed his relationship with his co-stars forever. Though he rarely spoke publicly about it near the end of his life, Curtis finally opened up to a close friend and longtime crew member, revealing the truth about the intense clashes, personal betrayals, and painful choices made behind the scenes. For millions of fans, Festus was the heart and soul of Gunsmoke. But for Ken, the role carried both pride and heartbreak. The actor's final words about his time on the show revealed a side of Gunsmoke few ever imagined, one filled with unspoken rivalries, loyalty tested under pressure, and moments that nearly tore the cast apart. Now, decades later, we can finally uncover what really happened on that legendary set, straight from the man who lived it. This is the untold truth of Ken Curtis's emotional confession before his death, a story that changes everything you thought you knew about Gunsmoke. Before he became the unforgettable Festus Hagen on Gunsmoke, Ken Curtis had already lived a life full of twists, turns, and transformations. Born Curtis Wayne Gates in Lamar, Colorado, on July 2, 1916, he grew up during the Great Depression in a world where hard work wasn't just a choice, it was survival. His father was a sheriff, his mother a homemaker, and young Ken learned early the values of integrity, kindness, and perseverance. These same qualities would later shape the character that millions would come to adore. But before stepping in front of a camera, Ken's first love wasn't acting, it was music. In his early years, he developed a rich tenor voice that caught the attention of major band leaders. By 1941, Ken was performing with the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra, even briefly replacing the legendary Frank Sinatra. From there, he joined the Sons of the Pioneers, one of the most famous Western singing groups of all time, recording beloved classics like Tumbling Tumbleweeds and Cool Water. For a time, it seemed that music would define his legacy, but Hollywood had other plans. After marrying Barbara Ford, daughter of iconic film director John Ford, Ken began appearing in Ford's westerns, including Rio Grande and The Quiet Man. Though he often played small roles, the experience shaped his understanding of on-screen storytelling and the rugged spirit of the Old West. Then, in 1964, fate handed him the role that would change everything: Festus Hagen, the scruffy, loyal deputy of Marshal Matt Dillon on Gunsmoke. It was a bold addition to a show already thriving for nearly a decade. Many wondered if this rough-edged newcomer could ever fit in with a cast so firmly established. At first, things were tense. Ken was the outsider, stepping into a dynamic where friendships had been built over years of long shooting days and late-night camaraderie. Some cast members viewed him as just another singing cowboy, trying to make it big. But Ken's humility and humor slowly began to win them over. He wasn't trying to outshine anyone, he just wanted to bring life to the role. And what a life he brought. Festus Hagen was unlike any other Western character on television. With his raspy voice, mismatched clothes, and tender heart hidden beneath that rough exterior, Festus became the soul of Gunsmoke. He could make audiences laugh one minute and cry the next, always standing as a loyal friend to Matt Dillon and a moral compass for Dodge City. Behind the laughter and camaraderie, though Ken Curtis carried a quiet burden. He was proud of his work, but he often felt overshadowed by the towering fame of James Arness and the rigid studio politics that sometimes made life on set difficult. In interviews, he hinted at creative disagreements and long days that tested friendships, but he never revealed the full story, at least not then. As the years went by, Ken's bond with his co-stars grew deeper, even through moments of silent tension. But near the end of his life, he finally revealed to a close confidant that not everything on the Gunsmoke set was as picture-perfect as it seemed. There were rivalries, regrets, and one heartbreaking incident that left him questioning his place among the people he once called family. That revelation would only come decades later. But it all began during those early days when Ken Curtis, a humble musician from Colorado, stepped into Dodge City and changed television forever. By the mid-1960s, Gunsmoke had become one of the biggest shows on television. Week after week, millions tuned in to watch Marshal Matt Dillon, Doc Adams, Miss Kitty, and the rest of Dodge City bring the Wild West to life. When Ken Curtis officially joined the cast as Festus Hagen, he quickly became a fan favorite. But behind the scenes, the air wasn't always filled with laughter and camaraderie. Curtis entered a show that had already been running for nearly a decade. The set had its routines, its unspoken rules, and its hierarchy. James Arness, who played Matt Dillon, was the undeniable star. Towering, stoic, and serious, Arness had a commanding presence both on and off camera. While Ken admired him deeply, their personalities couldn't have been more different. Arness was quiet and reserved, while Curtis was outgoing, talkative, and always cracking jokes between takes. That contrast sometimes led to subtle tension that neither man publicly discussed. According to several crew members, Ken worked hard to earn respect. He often stayed late rehearsing lines, studying the nuances of Festus, determined to give the role authenticity. Some believed he was trying too hard, while others quietly envied how quickly audiences embraced him. Despite the whispers, Ken refused to let resentment take root. His approach was simple: be kind, be funny, and be professional. But one particular event tested that attitude. During the filming of a late-season episode, Ken reportedly disagreed with Arness over how Festus should deliver a scene. The disagreement, though small, turned into a full-blown argument that left the crew stunned. For the first time, the easygoing chemistry between Festus and Matt on screen was mirrored by real tension off camera. While both men quickly made peace for the sake of the show, those close to Ken said it deeply affected him. He respected Arness immensely, but realized then that the Gunsmoke family wasn't as harmonious as fans imagined. Beyond the cast, the pressures of Hollywood were also weighing heavily. The network demanded constant changes to keep the show fresh, often at the expense of character consistency. Ken, who poured his heart into Festus, found it difficult when writers made decisions that didn't align with his vision. Still, he remained loyal, never missing a day of work and always bringing his best energy to the set. Off-screen, Ken became known as the mood lifter. He'd bring his guitar to set, singing cowboy ballads to lighten long, exhausting days. Many crew members later said that without Ken's humor and music, the Gunsmoke set would have felt far more rigid. Even Arness, who rarely joined in the joking, couldn't help but smile at Ken's antics. Despite the occasional clashes, there was deep, mutual respect. Arness later admitted that no one embodied the heart of Gunsmoke better than Curtis. Yet Ken still carried quiet disappointment about certain friendships that never blossomed the way he hoped. Some of the older cast members kept to themselves, maintaining a professional distance that sometimes made him feel like an outsider. Even years after joining, as the seasons went on, Ken Curtis became one of the show's cornerstones. He gave Festus emotional depth that transcended the comic sidekick stereotype. But when the camera stopped rolling, he often reflected on the heavy atmosphere behind the scenes. Fame, egos, and exhaustion had created invisible walls among the cast, walls that never completely came down. It wasn't until years later, long after Gunsmoke ended, that Ken admitted the truth. Despite the laughter and success, the show's set carried moments of sadness, loneliness, and regret. And though he loved the people he worked with, one painful incident near the show's final seasons would forever haunt him, a betrayal that forced him to see Hollywood and friendship in a completely different light. As Gunsmoke entered its final seasons, Ken Curtis had cemented himself as one of the show's emotional pillars. Festus wasn't just comic relief anymore, he was the moral core of Dodge City. Fans adored his loyalty, his humor, and the heartfelt friendship he shared with Marshal Matt Dillon. Yet behind that warm smile, Ken was facing one of the most difficult periods of his career. Rumors began circulating that Gunsmoke might end soon. The cast, many of whom had worked together for 2 decades, felt a mix of exhaustion and fear. For Ken, who had dedicated nearly 15 years of his life to the role, the uncertainty was unbearable. But worse than the looming cancellation was something far more personal, a sense of betrayal that would cut him deeper than any career setback. Ken had always been loyal to the show and its people. He believed Gunsmoke was more than a job. It was a family. But during the production of one of the later seasons, he discovered that important creative decisions were being made without his knowledge. A new producer had joined the team and, in an effort to modernize the show, wanted to phase out older characters. According to those who knew Ken, he found out not from a meeting or memo, but from a crew member who overheard executives discussing it. For an actor who had given so much of himself to Gunsmoke, the revelation was crushing. He had fought hard to make Festus a beloved, multi-dimensional character, and now he felt disposable. To make matters worse, some cast members, those Ken thought of as close friends, remained silent. Whether out of fear or politics, no one warned him or stood up for him. The betrayal didn't just come from the show's leadership. It came from the people he trusted most. Ken's easygoing demeanor began to fade. Crew members noticed him spending more time alone between takes. Lost in thought, his ever-present smile dimmed. When asked in interviews about his time on Gunsmoke, he would always respond with warmth and gratitude, but those close to him later said there was a sadness in his eyes whenever the topic came up. Ken once confided to a friend that he felt Hollywood had changed. "It used to be about people," he reportedly said. "Now it's about control." The set that once felt like home had turned cold. And though he continued to give everything he had to his performance, the experience had forever altered his view of the industry. Still, Curtis wasn't one to hold grudges publicly. Even after Gunsmoke finally came to an end in 1975, he continued to defend the show's legacy and his fellow actors. But privately, he admitted that the pain of being excluded, of realizing that his input and friendship meant less than ratings, stayed with him for the rest of his life. When asked years later if he ever considered leaving the show earlier, Ken simply smiled and said, "Festus wouldn't quit on his friends." That one line said it all. Even in disappointment, he embodied the same loyalty his character stood for. But the emotional toll had lasting effects. After Gunsmoke, Ken struggled to find roles that matched the authenticity of Festus. Hollywood had moved on, chasing new trends, leaving behind the westerns that once defined American television. And while fans continued to cherish him, Ken often felt forgotten by the very system he had helped build. It wasn't until much later, near the end of his life, that he decided to finally speak about what really happened. In a quiet, heartfelt conversation with a longtime friend, he revealed the truth about the betrayal, the loneliness, and the regrets he carried. That confession would become one of the most emotional moments of his life, and a story fans would only learn after his passing. In the final years of his life, Ken Curtis stepped away from the limelight, choosing peace over fame. He moved to a quiet home near Fresno, California, where he spent his days surrounded by family, close friends, and a small circle of fans who still cherished the man behind Festus Hagen. Though his days on Gunsmoke were long behind him, the memories never faded. The laughter, the dusty sets, the long days under the blazing studio lights, they were all still vivid in his mind. But so were the wounds. As Ken's health began to decline in the early 1990s, he became reflective. Friends often described him as warm but distant, as if he carried an invisible weight. One of those close friends, a longtime Gunsmoke crew member, later revealed that Ken finally opened up about what had really happened behind the scenes, and what had haunted him for years. He confessed that the hardest part of Gunsmoke wasn't the long filming hours, the physical exhaustion, or even the creative conflicts. It was the feeling of being left out by people he once called family. Ken revealed that he and James Arness had drifted apart near the end of the series. What started as a friendship built on mutual respect had cooled into silence. "I loved Jim like a brother," Ken reportedly said, "but fame changes people. It changes how they see you." Ken admitted that he felt pushed aside during the final seasons, his screen time gradually reduced without explanation. He wasn't angry at Arness, but at the system that had turned camaraderie into competition. That, he said, was his deepest regret. Not speaking up, not fighting harder to preserve the bond they once shared. But even in his disappointment, Ken remained grateful. He told friends that Gunsmoke gave him more than any role could, a legacy that would live on for generations. He often rewatched old episodes, sometimes laughing at Festus's bumbling charm, other times wiping away quiet tears. "That was me at my happiest," he once said softly. When fans approached him in public, they never called him Ken Curtis. They called him Festus. And rather than correct them, he embraced it. To him, Festus was more than a role. It was a reflection of his soul. A man loyal to a fault, kind to strangers, and honest even when it hurt. In a way, Ken had poured every bit of himself into that dusty deputy's boots. In one of his last interviews, he was asked what Gunsmoke meant to him. His response was simple but profound. It was more than a job. "It was a piece of my life, of all our lives. But when you ride off into the sunset, you realize some trails don't cross again." Ken Curtis passed away on April 28, 1991, at the age of 74. The news broke the hearts of fans across the country. Tributes poured in from old co-stars, directors, and thousands of loyal viewers who had grown up with him on their screens. James Arness later spoke warmly of him, calling Ken a rare soul and a man who brought laughter to every corner of Dodge City. But for those who knew Ken best, his final confession revealed something far deeper, the truth that even in Hollywood's golden years, the bonds formed on set could break under the weight of fame. And yet in the end, Ken held no bitterness. He left this world with peace in his heart, proud of the character that made him a legend and grateful to the fans who never stopped loving him. Decades later, when reruns of Gunsmoke still play on television screens, it's Ken's voice, the slow drawl of Festus Hagen, that reminds viewers of a simpler time, when loyalty and laughter mattered more than fame. And somewhere out there, the spirit of Festus still rides through Dodge City, keeping Ken Curtis's legacy alive forever.